Gold, the metal of gods, the eternal promise of value. For thousands of years, it was the one thing humanity agreed upon. Gold was real, incorruptible, and untouchable by politics. Empires rose and fell, but gold remained the silent judge of their worth. To possess it was to hold power. To lose it was to fade into dust. Kings hoarded it, merchants worshipped it, and nations fought wars over it. In the gleam of gold, the world saw order, a standard that bound civilization to reality itself. But every age births its illusion. As industrialization consumed the 19th century, money began to drift from metal to promise. Paper notes emerged, each stamped with a declaration, redeemable in gold. The trust was simple. The paper was only as strong as the vault behind it. Yet, even then, bankers and politicians saw something more. They saw the possibility of infinite money, detached from the constraints of weight and metal. Gold was finite, paper was not. And in that difference lay the seed of a new empire. The United States entered the 20th century with a mission to build the most powerful economy on Earth. But it also carried a burden: how to expand endlessly while tied to a metal that refused to multiply. The answer came in stages, subtle, deliberate, and wrapped in necessity. First came the Federal Reserve in 1913, a private system disguised as a public guardian. Its promise, to stabilize the economy through controlled issuance of money. Its true power, to create money out of nothing, backed not by gold, but by debt. World War I turned gold into a ghost. Nations printed more than they could redeem, believing victory would restore their balance. It didn't. The war left Europe shattered, its treasuries empty and its people in despair. The U.S., however, emerged with vaults full of gold and a currency now demanded across the globe. The dollar began to eclipse its rivals, not through conquest of land, but through conquest of trust. The illusion was taking form. Paper could rule as long as people believed in the promise behind it. Then came 1944, Bretton Woods. Delegates from 44 nations gathered to rebuild the world's financial order. The decision they made changed history. They tied every currency to the US dollar and the dollar itself to gold. It was a masterstroke of design, a pyramid of trust with America at its peak. Other nations surrendered their gold to US vaults, receiving dollars in return. Gold still sat at the base of the system, but only one nation held the key. The rest of the world was now dependent on America's promise to keep it real. For a time, it worked. Trade boomed, economies recovered, and the dollar became the blood of the global system. But beneath the surface, the numbers stopped adding up. The US was printing more dollars than it had gold to back them. Wars in Korea and Vietnam devoured reserves, while the government expanded spending with paper promises. Foreign nations began to suspect the truth. Gold was leaving American vaults faster than it could be replaced. The illusion was beginning to crack. In 1971, the moment came. On a quiet Sunday evening, President Richard Nixon appeared on television and delivered the shock that would redefine modern finance. He temporarily suspended the dollar's convertibility into gold. In a single act, the link between money and reality was broken. Gold was exiled from the monetary system, and the dollar became pure belief. The world entered a new era where value existed only because governments declared it so. The illusion was complete, and the system never looked back. What followed was a silent coup. Central banks no longer needed gold to justify their power. They became the creators of modern wealth, manipulating interest rates, inflation, and liquidity at will. The dollar, now unchained, spread across the world like a digital empire, buying obedience and rewriting the rules of trade. The gold-backed world had ended, replaced by a faith-based economy managed by unseen hands. Money was no longer a mirror of reality, but a reflection of authority. Gold retreated to the shadows, reborn as an ancient relic, a hedge against the very system that replaced it. Yet its symbolism endures. Every financial crisis reignites the same question. If the world's wealth can vanish with a keystroke, what is truly real? The answer still glimmers in vaults and memories, a reminder that once value was something you could touch. The system may have evolved, but the human longing for tangible truth never died. And so, the gold illusion remains. The story of how the pursuit of infinite power dethroned a finite truth. A story not of metal, but of manipulation. Not of progress, but of control. The dollar's rise was not an accident of economics, but a masterpiece of strategy. The transformation of trust into domination. Gold may no longer rule the world, but its ghost haunts every printed bill, every digital transaction, every promise we still choose to believe. After the Nixon Shock, the financial world stood still. The promise that had bound nations together was gone, replaced by uncertainty and disbelief. Governments scrambled to adapt, and investors rushed to find what value meant in a world without gold. Yet, amid the chaos, something extraordinary happened. The dollar did not collapse. Instead, it grew stronger. The illusion of value had become more powerful than value itself. Confidence, not convertibility, became the foundation of global wealth. Humanity had crossed the threshold into a new kind of faith, the religion of fiat money. In the years that followed, the United States mastered the art of control through credit. No longer limited by reserves of gold, the country could issue as much currency as needed to maintain dominance. Wars could be financed without consequence, markets inflated without restraint. Every printed dollar was a promise of power, not backed by metal, but by the might of the American economy and military. It was a brilliant paradox. The more debt the U.S. created, the more the world depended on its currency. The chains of gold had been replaced by invisible strings of obligation. Meanwhile, other nations were forced to play the same game. To compete in the global market, they too had to print, borrow, and inflate. Currencies floated freely, and with them, entire economies swayed like ships in a storm. The era of stability was over. Volatility had become the new norm. Central banks emerged as the new gods of finance, using interest rates and monetary policy as tools to shape the destiny of nations. Their decisions no longer measured gold. They measured belief. And belief, they discovered, could be engineered. The petrodollar system became the next pillar of the illusion. In the 1970s, the U.S. struck a deal with Saudi Arabia. Oil would be sold exclusively in dollars, and in return, America would provide protection. The consequences were enormous. Every nation on Earth now needed dollars to buy energy, the lifeblood of civilization. This created an artificial demand for the U.S. currency, anchoring its dominance without a single ounce of gold. The world's dependence on oil had become dependence on the dollar. The empire had found its new foundation, not in metal, but in necessity. The financial system transformed into a web of speculation and debt. Wall Street replaced the mines and foundries of the past, producing wealth from numbers and expectations. Stocks, bonds, and derivatives became the new gold, each layer further abstracting reality. The distance between value and representation grew so vast that only experts could pretend to understand it. Yet the illusion held, because as long as prices rose, no one cared what was real. Prosperity became performance, and the system thrived on the illusion of endless growth. But illusions demand constant maintenance. Every financial crisis since the 1970s, from the oil shocks to the 2008 collapse, has been a test of faith. Each time, central banks responded the same way, by printing more money, inflating more debt, and promising that this time would be different. The pattern became predictable. The cure for too much money was always more money. The illusion, instead of breaking, grew stronger. The system learned to feed on its own instability. Gold, meanwhile, remained silent, a mirror reflecting what the world refused to see. Each time the illusion faltered, investors returned to it like pilgrims seeking sanctuary. They called it a safe haven, but what they truly sought was memory, a reminder of a time when value had substance. The price of gold became a barometer of trust. When faith in the system wavered, gold rose. When the illusion regained strength, it fell. Gold was no longer money, it was conscience. As decades passed, generations grew up in a world where money existed only as digits on screens. Few remembered that it was once backed by something real. The idea of value became psychological, shaped by perception, media, and policy. People no longer questioned what a dollar was. They only cared what it could buy. This shift was the true triumph of the gold illusion. It wasn't just the separation of currency from metal, it was the separation of reality from meaning. Meanwhile, the United States cemented its supremacy not through invasion, but through inflation. By controlling the world's reserve currency, it could export debt and import goods, living beyond its means indefinitely. Other nations financed America's consumption by buying its bonds, pieces of paper backed by promises. The global economy became a cycle of debt disguised as progress. Every transaction, every trade, every loan was a thread in a web spun by the dollar. The world had been captured, not by armies, but by accounting. And so, the illusion endured. The dollar became the modern philosopher's stone, turning paper into power, numbers into nations, and faith into empire. The world no longer measured wealth in ounces, but in digits, charts, and algorithms. Gold, once the heartbeat of civilization, was now a relic locked away in vaults, waiting. Because deep down, everyone knows that no illusion lasts forever. And when this one ends, the world will once again ask the oldest question in human history. What is money, and what is it truly worth? By the dawn of the 21st century, the illusion had matured into a masterpiece. The dollar ruled not by decree, but by dependency. Every nation, bank, and corporation was entangled in the same web, borrowing, lending, and speculating in a currency no longer tied to anything real. Economies expanded not through creation, but through consumption. Growth became a measure of credit, and debt became the new definition of wealth. Humanity had replaced gold with promises and learned to call it progress. The world was thriving, but on borrowed time. The digital revolution supercharged the illusion. Money detached completely from its physical form and became pure data, streams of code flowing through invisible networks. Every transaction left a trace, every account a profile. The global system had evolved into a self-aware organism, monitoring and adjusting itself in real time. The new vaults were not built of stone and steel, but of encryption and cloud servers. Gold was gone, but control had never been stronger. The system no longer needed trust in metal. It had built trust in technology. With this transformation came new forms of power. Financial markets no longer reflected the real economy. They became simulations of belief. Stocks soared not because of production, but because of perception. Central banks learned to speak in signals. A single statement could move trillions. The illusion had become language, and words were the new currency. The power once held in gold bars now existed in speeches, policies, and algorithms that shaped global emotion. Confidence was no longer earned, it was engineered. The 2008 crisis revealed the depth of this illusion. When banks collapsed under the weight of their own greed, the entire system stood on the edge of implosion. But instead of facing the truth, governments chose denial. They printed money on an unimaginable scale, bailed out the same institutions that caused the collapse, and told the public it was necessary to save the economy. And it worked. Not because the problem was solved, but because belief was restored. The illusion had become so complete that it could survive its own death. From that moment on, money became pure fiction, a story written by those in control. Central banks injected trillions into the system, buying bonds, manipulating markets, and inflating asset prices beyond logic. The rich grew richer, the poor drowned in debt, and the middle class clung to the fantasy of stability. Every crisis became an opportunity to print more, to push the limits further. The illusion had achieved immortality, or so it seemed, for even the grandest illusion must answer to reality. Then came the digital frontier, cryptocurrencies. For the first time since gold, people saw a chance to reclaim financial sovereignty. A currency beyond governments, beyond banks, governed by code and mathematics. It was rebellion disguised as innovation. Yet even this revolution carried echoes of the past. Just as gold was once hoarded by kings, digital coins were soon captured by speculators and corporations. The cycle of control continued, reshaped but unbroken. The illusion simply adapted to survive. Meanwhile, nations began planning their next move: central bank digital currencies. Digital money, programmable and traceable, directly controlled by state systems. No longer would money be a tool of freedom. It would become an instrument of surveillance. Every transaction monitored, every account modifiable at will. The illusion was evolving into its final form, total control disguised as modernization. Humanity, in its quest for convenience, was building its own digital cage, yet gold remained, silent, heavy, immutable. It waited, as it always had, for belief to collapse. Every empire that abandoned gold eventually faced the same reckoning. When trust evaporates, reality returns. The moment people stop believing in paper, pixels, and promises, they will once again seek the metal that cannot lie. Gold is not just an element, it is memory, the memory of truth in a world built on illusions. And when that day comes, the world will remember that the gold illusion was never about metal at all. It was about faith, the faith we place in systems we don't understand, in institutions that promise stability while selling control. The story of gold and the dollar is the story of humanity, its eternal struggle between freedom and fear, between truth and comfort. It is a reminder that no empire lasts forever, especially those built on belief. So the question remains, echoing through every vault, every market, every digital screen: how long can the illusion hold? Because one day, the code will fail, the trust will fracture, and the glittering facade will collapse under its own weight. And when it does, gold will not gloat. It will simply endure, silent, timeless, waiting once more to remind humanity what real value means.